everyone, and welcome back to the next live based upon my book Beyond Asanas. This book was published in 2019, and those of you who have been following me know that for this past couple of weeks I've been revisiting the stories that I've written about in all of the chapters of this book. And today we are on chapter 16. Now, chapter 16 is Bhujang Asana, and Bhujang Asana translated is serpent pose. Bhujanga means serpent pose. So now this pose is actually very interesting because snakes are not really, figures that you would think about very positively or with any good feelings and intentions. Snakes always have, like, you associate them with like slithering around with some sort of danger, and so they are, even in mythology, they're very feared, and they're dreaded. They're not exactly, they haven't been like real good friends of people, and of other characters. However, there's so many stories in Hindu mythology where snakes have actually cooperated and even coordinated efforts with others to bring for a common purpose. So in this chapter, I take three stories and I talk about the three stories, and all of them are related to snakes. So the first story I talk about is called Snakes and Belts. And many of you who've been following along, you will see in one of my previous lives, I spoke about the story of Ganesh, about how he was returning from a party one day, and he had overeaten, and that's when there was a snake that crossed his path. So that's the first story that I talk about, even in the Bhujangasana chapter, how about, like, one day Ganesh had gone to this big feast, and he's a lover of the good life. He loves to eat, and you can tell by his big tummy that he really appreciates good food. And he's at this feast, and he eats a lot. And he's like sort of like drowsy and very happy, after this big meal that he's had. And he's going home on his, on his rat, Krauncha. And, they're going along, and all of a sudden there's this snake that crosses their path. And Krauncha becomes really scared, and he sort of rears, because of fear. And because he does that, Ganesh loses his balance and falls to the floor. And when he does that, his stomach like bursts open, and all the food kind of spreads out, all over the road. And for anyone, if this happened to anybody, they would be like, okay, something horrible has happened, and but Ganesh wasn't like that. What Ganesh did was, he very patiently, picked up every single piece of food that had fallen and put it back into his tummy. And he took that serpent, so that is where the importance of the snake comes in. He took that serpent and he tied the serpent like a belt around his waist to hold the, his stomach, to hold the food in his stomach. So that is the first story. I start with this story in this chapter. So that's the first story of how, like a snake has come in handy for a god, for Lord Ganesh. Now, the second story I talk about is a little different. This story is called Snake to the Rescue. And this actually goes back to the Samudra Manthan, which is again something that I've written about previously also, because these are all stories which are very, very important stories in Hinduism and in yoga mythology specifically. So Snake to the Rescue, this story talks about how a long time ago, Lord Indra had accidentally he had insulted a gift that Durvasa was a sage, a very powerful sage. He gave Lord Indra a garland of flowers, and Lord Indra accidentally it was a big misunderstanding. He insults that that gift, and Durvasa gets very angry and he curses the Devatas. He says, all of the Devas, I'm going to make you powerless. So none of the powers, all of your powers will be gone. So when that happened, all of the Devas were cursed, and in the fights, in the wars that they would have with the Asuras, the Devas started losing. And these Asuras started winning these wars, and then there was no balance in the world, and so everybody was really concerned, like there should be something that's done, because if the Asuras kept winning, then the world would be very different from what it is. So then they say that, okay, we have to do something. that we have to do something to fix this imbalance that has happened. So what they decide is that they would take a little bit of the nectar of immortality. So with that nectar of immortality, they would be immortal and they would live forever and they would never lose to the asuras. But to get that, what they did was they told the asuras, because the asuras also wanted this nectar of immortality, and we've spoken about that before also. And so the devas tell the asuras that, okay, if you collaborate with us, if you help us get the nectar of immortality, we'll give you a little bit of it also, and then you can also be immortal just like us. So the asuras said okay. And this is when they decided to churn the ocean. And to churn the ocean, they needed, something to churn the ocean with. So they said, okay, Vasuki, again a snake, Vasuki the snake, would you please help us in churning the ocean? And so Vasuki says, okay. And now the Devtas were playing a little, kind of like a snide game here, because what they did was they held Vasuki's tail and told the Asuras to hold his head and then start the churning. And the more they churned, the faster they went. Vasuki started to feel more and more dizzy. And as he felt dizzy, there was this whole kind of like nauseous fumes that started, coming out of his mouth. Okay, and he started emitting these fumes, and these are poisonous fumes. So the more they churned, the dizzier he got, and the more these fumes that came out of his mouth. And all of a sudden the fumes exited his mouth and they fell on the asuras, and the asuras were decimated. Now the problem is that these fumes now, because they could not because Vasuki was still dizzy and they couldn't stop these fumes were going to destroy the earth, and they were going to destroy the devtas also. So luckily at that time, and this is the story of the Samudra Manthan, luckily at that time Lord Shiva was there, and this nauseous fumes that were emitted by Vasuki are also sometimes called the hala. Some people think that the hala is actually the nauseous fume that Vasuki emitted. So what happens is Lord Shiva comes down and takes this into his mouth, into his throat, and it's so poisonous that it turns his throat blue, and that's why we call Shiva Nilakanta. But this is where the story of how a snake helps the gods it figures in yoga mythology. So this is the second story I talk about. Now the third story I talk about is called the snake who became a sage. And this is very, very relevant to yoga practitioners because it features a very important, one of the most important characters in yoga. So the story goes that one day Lord Vishnu was reclining on Adishesha. So you've seen the reclining Vishnu, and he was reclining on this Adishesha, the lord of the serpents. So Vishnu was reclining, and he was watching Shiva dancing. And eventually, the more he watched Shiva dancing, the more his body, he was enchanted by it, and his body began to sway from side to side. And he became more and more relaxed and heavier also. And Adishesha found it very difficult to support Vishnu as he was watching this dance. And Adishesha was really confused by this phenomena, what had happened. And so when Vishnu was free, he asked Vishnu, what is this? Why did you get heavier? And Vishnu said, well, the dance, Shiva's dance is so magnificent and so scintillating and mesmerizing that anyone who watches it becomes swayed by the rhythm. You start to watch Shiva dancing and you sort of start swaying with him. And that's why I became more and more relaxed and my body became heavier. And Adishesha was just, he was completely enthralled by this. And he said, well, I also want to learn this dance. How can I do this? Please tell me how I can learn. And Lord Vishnu had to really think about this because Adishesha was a snake, and how can a snake dance? So he thought, he meditated, and eventually one day he said, okay, Adishesha, you want to learn from Lord Shiva. So I grant you this boon that you will be destined to write a treatise on grammar. You're going to be destined to write a book on grammar. And in fact, Lord Shiva himself will ask you will ask you to write this book. And once you do this and you're done with writing this book, you can then, eventually learn how to dance also. You can ask him, you can request him to teach you how to dance also. So Adishesha was like, okay, that sounds like a good plan. And he had to take an incarnation on earth. And so they're looking for the right time for when this can happen. And what happens at this point is that there is a yogini called Gonika, and many yoga practitioners would be familiar with her, so with this figure. So Gonika was also someone who had, for a long time, who had wanted a child, and she had done a lot of tapasya for a child, but that boon had not been granted to her. So one day, and so Lord Vishnu understands this and recognizes this, and decides that, okay, it's time for a boon to be granted to her also. And one day she's just praying to Surya this time, and asking him for a child. And she has her hands folded, and there's a little bit of water in her hand, and she's about to put this water for Surya, like this is a practice to propitiate Surya. And her eyes are closed, and when she opens them to look at the water that's in her hands, all of a sudden she sees that there's a small snake in it. And this snake eventually grows in size and becomes a man and stands in front of her. So this is basically Adishesha, who has come down as manifesting as Gonika's son. And now he's fully grown, and he into a human being, and he prostrates himself in front of Gonika and says that I am your son, and thank you for granting me this boon. And Gonika says, okay, I accept you as my son, and because you fell into my hands when I was about to give Anjali to Surya, she says, I'm going to name you Patanjali. So that's how Patanjali also came to earth. And that's how Gonika became Patanjali's mother. And so Patanjali is actually a reincarnation of Adishesha. Now, what is the significance? Like always, there's a significance and symbolism in every single chapter. So in this chapter, the significance is actually related to snakes. So the snakes are actually a metaphor for our fears and negative emotions. And the thing about fears and negative emotions is that a lot of time we try to push them down, and we don't face them head on. And when this happens, there can be a kind of like a stunting of our emotions, or stunting of growth, because we're unable to get over these emotions to move forward. Now, it's very important, and the practice of yoga actually helps us in resolving our negative emotions. And this is very important because if we stay with these negative emotions and these fears, it can also be debilitating and restrict our growth. And yoga is all about growth and all about accepting what is, accepting everything as it is right now. So in a way, if you see a snake sheds its old skin, and walks and is sort of emerges with new skin. So that is a metaphor, and that is symbolic for us also. There are many things from our past which we can kind of shed, and once we shed that, we can move on, in life as a new person. So getting rid and shedding off of negative and old emotions that no longer serve us, and then moving on, living in the world with a whole different perspective. So that is that is the symbolism of the Bhujanga Asana, and that is how you can interpret Bhujanga Asana that you do on the mat with like how it is in life, how you can take the meaning of Bhujanga Asana and apply it for your daily life. So that is it for today. The stories are from this book, Beyond Asanas. And if you have any questions about Hindu mythology, yoga mythology, please let me know. You can either email me or leave me a comment. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.